Olá, eu sou Luiziane Lins, sou professora universitária, fui vereadora de Fortaleza por 2 mandatos, deputada estadual, fui prefeita de Fortaleza também por 2 mandatos e atualmente eu sou deputada federal pelo Partido dos Trabalhadores e também formada em comunicação social pela Universidade Federal do Ceará, mestre em comunicação social pela PUC do Rio de Janeiro e atualmente doutoranda em comunicação e semiótica pela PUC de São Paulo. E é um prazer estar aqui conversando com nada mais, nada menos, com Christian Rabson, que é jornalista investigativo, editor-chefe, porta-voz do Wikileaks desde 2010, e ele, juntamente com vários outros jornalistas, estão visitando, fazendo um grande trabalho, que é exatamente na luta em defesa da liberdade de Julian Assange, como também do direito à informação. Por que é que o Assange hoje, resgatando um pouco, tem inimigos tão poderosos que querem a todo momento tirar a sua liberdade? E por fim, agora em julho desse ano, nós vimos aí uma decisão absolutamente arbitrária, autoritária, cruel e inadmissível, que é a possibilidade da extradição dele para os Estados Unidos. Então, gostaria que você recuperasse um pouco e nos dissesse por que essas pessoas não conseguem lidar com Assange livre.
Well, you're absolutely right that Julian is facing a giant. Most countries don't even dare to object to this power. So it is really a tough battle that he is facing, a battle that is now extending to a second decade where he has been deprived of freedom in one way or another. It is an adversary that needs to be held accountable. Not many journalists have dared to take that stand, but Julian has and is now paying the price. He is considered a threat. He is considered a threat to this power for a very simple reason. This power does not want the truth out, the truth about their violations against lives, the violations against treaties, the violations against decency. All this was exposed by Julian. What we are basically seeing is the revenge of the empire, the revenge of an empire against an individual that stands firm against them. It's important to keep in mind that the reaction to Julian Assange and this small organization that he created is revealing the weakness of the evilness of the empire. So it also should give us a hope that we can fight back. And that is the inspiration that WikiLeaks brought to people, the inspiration that people can rally together against the evil forces that were unleashed in an unprecedented manner all over the world after 9/11 and have been sweeping and marking this entire period of this century.
Aí eu gostaria de perguntar para você, Rabson, no caso, ao invés de estarmos procurando a responsabilidade de quem denunciou, a gente não deveria estar muito mais focado no conteúdo da espionagem que é praticada contra o mundo inteiro e no conteúdo das denúncias que são feitas, que são gravíssimas violações de direitos humanos em todo o mundo?
This is the times that we live on. It's the time where those who tell the truth are the ones who are persecuted. We are living at a dark time that will be remembered in history as a terrible period. Just take one example. Think about the torture program of the CIA after 9/11, a systematic torture with torture camps and black sites. It has all been exposed. A single individual, a whistleblower, an insider from the CIA, he helped expose it, John Kiriakou, who actually leaked to the media information about the extent of the renditions and the CIA torture programs. Who has been held accountable for the torture? No one. Who went to prison? John Kiriakou, the man who dared to tell the story. And the case of Julian is exactly the same, but on a grander scale. They want his life. They want to crush him. They want to punish him in a revenge and to send a signal to everybody else. If you reveal our secrets, our ill deeds, you will pay a price. That is the signal. It is a very raw and brutal signal, but that is the reality of the times. And you mentioned the impunity for all the war crimes. Not a single incident has occurred where all the war crimes that were exposed by WikiLeaks and by Julian Assange, no one has been held accountable, including those pilots in the collateral murder video, the helicopter pilots who were laughing at the same time they were shooting at civilians, innocent civilians and children in Iraq.
E esse processo contra Assange, o fundador do WikiLeaks, ele ocorreu durante o governo de Trump e continua agora no governo de Joe Biden. O Departamento de Justiça dos Estados Unidos utiliza uma lei sobre a espionagem datada da Primeira Guerra Mundial, ou seja, para processar o jornalista, quando na verdade o que a gente sabe e o que a gente viu foi o Assange expondo questões de interesse público. E é muito grave essa informação que você traz de que ninguém, nem nada que cometeu assassinatos, barbaridades, crueldades, torturas, foi jamais julgado ou condenado.
You raised actually a very interesting point. The Espionage Act of 1917, it is simply a tool of torture. It is simply a tool that the Americans are using in this lawfare against Julian Assange. And as you mentioned it, the public interest is not allowed in the defense when you are defending the Espionage Act charges. You cannot go and say, well, we are doing this in the public interest. A public interest defense is not allowed. So they specifically are using this tool as a revenge tool, a hammer to crush journalists. We always said that this would happen when they started using this tool, this archaic tool from a century old, against whistleblowers. We said journalists will be next. And lo and behold, Julian Assange is the first publisher and journalist that is hit with this hammer, which is so archaic and brutal in nature that it's very hard to put on a defense. So what the Americans are basically saying is that we don't care about public interest. This doesn't matter in the whole equation. And that's saying that journalism is illegal because journalism has its essence in serving the public interest. So it's a total disregard for that principle and total disregard for the foundation of the work of journalism in the democratic process. So it's an attack on journalism, it's an attack on democracy, it's an overall attack on human rights. So how ironic is it that we have the empire who is preaching press freedom all around the world, and they claim to have the kindle of liberty and freedom as the symbol to export all around the world, that they will be the most serious attackers on press freedom in our modern days. And how ironic is it that when they have a clause in their constitution, the First Amendment, which is a wonderful tool in essence, and is envied and copied in many other places, that they strike a blow to that principle. So it's very urgent that everybody that can speaks out and tells the White House and the Biden administration, if you want any credibility in the world, you have to stand by those principles that you are preaching to others.
E penso também, Rabson, que abre um terrível precedente para qualquer jornalista ou qualquer um que esteja lutando para diariamente estar colocando verdades para que todo mundo saiba, porque basta você agora acusar um jornalista de espionagem ou aquele jornalista que está denunciando crime de guerra, que está denunciando corrupção, que está denunciando tortura, basta chamá-los de espiões para que eles sejam extraditados de qualquer lugar do mundo. Então é tudo muito grave, e grave contra todos nós jornalistas e todas as entidades da sociedade civil que lutam por liberdade.
I totally agree with you. It is a very serious attack on truth, and it makes you wonder how it can come to be that an empire is trying to keep its position by trying to crush the truth. It only means one thing, that the position of the empire is based on a lie.
Uma coisa importante que a gente destacar aqui é que todas as federações, de uma forma geral, de jornalistas livres e independentes, como a Federação Internacional dos Jornalistas, as federações europeias de jornalistas, aqui no Brasil, no caso, a Federação Nacional dos Jornalistas Profissionais, a Associação Brasileira de Imprensa, né? Também a Associação Brasileira de Jornalistas Investigativos, todos estão apoiando a liberdade de Assange. Então, eu queria que você falasse um pouco para a gente, nesse momento, que agora, a partir de julho de 2022, houve uma decisão de uma ministra do interior, né, do Reino Unido, no sentido de fazer a extradição para os Estados Unidos, que para nós isso é muito grave. Então, nós não podemos deixar que isso aconteça. Então, em que pé está hoje essa questão da extradição em relação ao Assange?
We stand at a crossroads in the legal proceedings, and we are running out of time. Julian has requested an appeal to the High Court in London, and we are waiting for the answer from the High Court, whether they will listen and take the appeal. Of course, it would be outrageous if they said no, but that is a possibility, especially when we know the pressure that has been put on the United Kingdom by the United States to deliver Julian Assange. If he is granted appeal, we at least are hoping that there is some form of civility within the UK legal system, and for the first time then, the entirety of the violations against Julian Assange and the entire process, the spying on his legally privileged communication, the stealing of legal documents by the CIA, the plan to kidnap or assassinate Julian, which has been exposed, and all the procedural violations against him, which makes it impossible for him to have a fair trial in the United States, will be exposed, and we hope that will be enough to stop the extradition. But of course, we want to take it further, and we want to put a pressure on the Biden administration to drop the case altogether, because the case in itself against Julian Assange is such a grave threat, as you mentioned, against press freedom all over the world, including here in Brazil. We need to also consider the fact that Julian Assange is in a precarious situation medically, both physically and mentally. And it was presented to the courts in England. The medical assessment by a prominent physicians in the country that his life would be seriously endangered if he was extradited, because he is facing there the end of his life. And that has not been contested in the courts. This is a threat to a man's life, but it's also a threat to the life of so many others if we allow this precedent to be set.
Hoje, eu particularmente considero o Assange o preso político mais importante, digamos assim, do Ocidente, porque nós tivemos aqui também uma situação extremamente delicada com o nosso atual presidente eleito, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, onde Lula passou por diversos julgamentos questionáveis, tanto é que todos os julgamentos, inclusive, foram anulados, né? Ficou 580 dias preso, né, na sede da Polícia Federal em Curitiba, e depois foi provado que, na verdade, era uma grande tentativa de um juiz de primeira instância, né, que queria culpabilizar, penalizar o Lula para ele não disputar a eleição na eleição de 2018. Ele foi desmascarado e o que eu acho importante colocar é que foi exatamente também, né, através do Intercept, né, de Glenn Greenwald, que fez um trabalho também jornalístico e pôde constatar a veracidade de uma grande armação política que havia por trás da prisão ilegal do Lula. Então, Lula nós considerávamos preso político. E eu também quero lhe dizer que nós consideramos também o Assange um preso político.
I think you are absolutely correct in drawing the parallel between President-elect Lula and Julian Assange. They are both subject to massive lawfare, which is the tool of choice these days when you want to suppress somebody on a political basis. Yes, Julian Assange is a political prisoner. He is being politically persecuted. And Lula's possibility to fight off his enemies and actually resurrect himself sends a great signal to Julian Assange in many ways. He was able to make a comeback, to clear his name, to show that he had been wronged in a very serious manner and is now elected president of this great country. That sends a signal of hope to all the world, that the possibility to fight back and have victory. And I am hoping as well that because the experience that Lula had, he will see the importance of assisting Julian Assange by taking part either collectively or individually in urging the Biden administration to end this. That is what I'm hoping for. This is why I'm here in the country, and I hope I'm successful, because we need this victory as well. We needed the resurrection, the incredible comeback of President-elect Lula, but we also need this persecution against Julian to end.
Com a sua experiência, você que se junta também ao Wikileaks, né? Também um jornalista com grande experiência em jornalismo investigativo, alguém que também milita, digamos assim, uma militância em favor da verdade. O que você diria, qual o papel agora, cada vez mais, do jornalismo investigativo, de uma entidade como o Wikileaks, no momento que nós estamos tão bombardeados de fake news? Onde é que está cada vez mais a força desse jornalismo investigativo num mundo que está precisando de tanta verdade?
Well, you called me an activist of the truth, but in my book, every journalist has to be an activist on that field, and there's nothing wrong with being an activist for truth. If you're not a real journalist. How do we counter this horrible trend that we are seeing in our culture these days? It is not an easy answer to that. But at least we know that we have to support and amplify every effort that we can find in journalistic circles in getting the truth out. How do you counter propaganda? You counter propaganda with proper journalism. So you have to give journalism a greater platform and resources. That is the remedy that will kill out the disinformation, the fabrications, the fake news that are now flooding in our systems. We must be very careful in taking legislative initiative that might be abused as censorship. That is very precarious to start taking those steps. But there are no easy answers in this field, but journalism has to be strengthened. The scientific journalistic model that was introduced by Julian Assange by presenting the raw data, the facts out there, to getting attention to it and amplify it, exposing crimes, exposing corruption. That is one way of doing it. I can only say that I have a hope that we can turn the tide on this one, on this battle, but it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be easy because the system that we are living by has been infested so much. We have to look at so many angles of society. One angle, of course, is the social media, the new elements that have got into our social sphere. And we have given them a lot of power. And we have even asked for censorship by private companies, which is very, very dangerous process to take. And I'm referring to COVID period and where there was a request by American-based social media companies to actually start to introduce censorship. A very dangerous step to take. But we need to do something, yes, and we need to put our heads together. But from my perspective and from my profession, strengthening journalism absolutely is a priority. And we need to turn that trend around because we are seeing the weakening of journalism and this very serious attack which is entailed in the Julian Assange story on global journalism. So there is also an awakening among journalists that has to take place about their roles in society and how they need to be activists. Like a person said, telling the truth today is a revolutionary act. And that is a reflection of the dark reality.
Para quem não tomou conhecimento ou quem não sabe dos detalhes do que aconteceu, que vazamento é esse que falam contra o Assange? O que foi exatamente o processo, né? E que vazamentos foram esses? Como é que esse processo se inicia, né? E como é que ele vira isso que nós estamos vendo agora?
And in 2010 and 11 came the biggest scoops of the century through the revelations of material leaked to WikiLeaks and presented in 2010 and 11. It was evidence of war crimes in the collateral murder video, the horrible video that showed the slaughtering of innocent civilians. It was the military field reports from Afghanistan showing that the wrongdoings on all platforms, the assassinations by killing squads by the US military, and war crimes of heinous natures. The same year, in 2010, there was reports from Iraq about the war crimes committed in that war. Again, slaughtering of civilians in the horrible manner with impunity. And then the diplomatic cables showing the extent and of diplomatic measures to have influence, often in a very critical manner all over the world. On the basis of this, and I should add, of course, the detainee files from Guantanamo Bay, which showed that people in Guantanamo were, in most cases, civilians that were apprehended and renditioned on little or no reliable information, often information that was gained through torture, which everybody knows is a very inaccurate way, to say the least, to get information. This led to this 12-year manhunt against Julian, an attempt to quash him and the organization. Everything was tried. He, of course, was able to seek asylum in the Ecuadorian embassy in London and stayed there for 7 years, surrounded by an army of police 24/7. It was not until there was a change of regime in Ecuador and Lenín Moreno took over from Rafael Correa that he sold him out. There is no other word for it. He betrayed Julian Assange in the most despicable manner. And he sold him out, as everybody knows today, in exchange for $1 billion financial aid from the World Bank and the International Monetary fund, which was secured by the Vice President of Donald Trump. And then the doors were open and he was dragged out of the embassy, breaching every principle in the book when it comes to our sanctity of asylum and embassies, etc. This is the essence of the case. This is what the empire now wants to crush him for, a pure political revenge. That is what we are, of course, fighting against, for the good of Julian Assange and for the healthiness of journalism and, in essence, democracy and decency all around the world.
Bom, como a gente está vendo, o crime a qual o Assange ele é responsabilizado é de falar a verdade e fazer com que o mundo conhecesse essa verdade. Eu participei como deputada federal, também como jornalista, ativamente da campanha por Lula livre. Então, eu gostaria que agora você falasse para a gente um pouco, porque nós todos, jornalistas e amantes da verdade e do bom jornalismo, das universidades, dos movimentos sociais, e agora nesse processo de retomada e de reconstrução do nosso país, que nós estamos aqui vivendo, vendo e querendo, eu gostaria de saber o que nós, no mundo inteiro, não só no Brasil, mas todas essas entidades que acreditam num mundo mais justo, humano, verdadeiro, que a gente pode fazer para a gente colaborar para a campanha da libertação de Assange e pelo direito à informação.
Well, I mean, you can do so many things, and it's so important that everybody helps in the effort, because the interests are so big. Academics can push the agenda. They can collectively analyze this and present to the public. They can work hand in hand with politicians who are on the right track in this field. They can inspire journalists and work with journalists in telling the story, because it needs to be told. We already have a campaign in London called Don't Extradite Assange. It's been in place now for 3 years. It has had an effect. We have had doctors pulling together in fighting for Julian Assange. We have lawyers internationally fighting for Julian Assange. We are hoping that we can get individual parliamentary groups in countries that now I think are 14 or 15 countries who are fighting for Julian Assange, pooling their resources together, and I'm hoping that lawmakers here in Brazil will join that. We need to fight this together on all fronts, because as you mentioned very rightly, this is a part of a bigger picture, a part in a bigger fight for human rights and indeed for democracy. So we need to work together on all fronts.
Seja muito bem-vindo aqui ao Brasil. Espero que essa missão seja muito bem sucedida. Estamos num momento onde nós estamos aqui todos muito otimistas com esse Brasil que vai ser reconstruído. E eu acho que ficou muito claro para as pessoas que nos assistem aqui que a liberdade do Assange não é simplesmente uma liberdade individual do indivíduo Assange, mas acima de tudo, eu acho que é a liberdade da boa informação, o direito dos povos de serem informados de forma devida e, acima de tudo, uma grande luta que nós podemos juntos empreender pela liberdade de Assange, como fizemos o Lula livre, vamos fazer Assange livre, principalmente pressionando o governo Biden para que retire todas as acusações, consequentemente, o processo sobre um jornalista que só quis falar e mostrar ao mundo a verdade. Muito obrigada pela entrevista.